Hi yogis, and welcome to Zen with Jen. My name is Jennifer Coffey. In this video, we are going to explore and open up those tight hips. I think this pretty much addresses 99% of the American population. We spend so much time in our cars, in chairs, very, compressed in our positions throughout the day. And then, of course, we're stressed out. And a lot of the stress that we carry in our bodies happens in our hips. And when we think about opening those up, it involves slow and prolonged stretches. So we're going to do a handful of those, keeping in mind you can take these with you and do them again at any time. And the beautiful part is that the more you do them, the more open you become. And once that flexibility comes into play, it just opens up a whole new world of possibilities. That's something I feel very passionately about. So in order to do our hip opening sequence, all you're going to need is a mat. You can of course do this on carpeted floor. Just give yourself a little bit of padding. You may also want either a yoga block, a meditation pillow, a sofa cushion works just fine as well. You don't need expensive equipment. Really all you need is your own body and a few minutes of time. So to begin, we'll start seated on our mat. If you think of coming into a traditional cross-legged pose, which many of us do sit in regularly, that opens up your hips to some extent. We want to take it a little bit further into what's called butterfly pose. So to do our butterfly, we're going to open up our legs just a little bit and bring the soles of our feet together. Now, I'm going to turn to the side so that you can see a couple of modifications. Because as I remember when I first started my yoga journey, bringing the soles of my feet together looked a lot like this. It certainly didn't look like bringing it in far closer to my body. That's perfectly okay. You're still opening up your hips that way. In fact, if you need to place your arms behind you to give your back some stability while you do that, that's more than okay. And then over time, you may find you can bring the soles of your feet further in, your body comes a little bit closer, and you open up the hips even more. So keep that in mind. I'll come back to facing you. Bring the soles of my feet together. Also, alternatively, if you'd like to place those yoga blocks underneath your knees or rolled up blankets or towels underneath, that's fine. Holding our feet together, we're gonna inhale and exhale. And we'll just hang here for a moment. Remember, this is the first pose we're doing, so just like any warm-up, we want to give our body time to assimilate and come to terms with the new movements that we're guiding it into. That might involve a little bit of discomfort. The whole goal of a stretch is to teach your body new ways to move and to be still, so don't be surprised if you come into some of these hip openers and really want to get out of them. When we do Pigeon a little bit later, I get to show you what used to be my least favorite hip opener and is now my #1 all-time favorite. When we hold these poses, it's also a wonderful opportunity to go to other places in our body via our mind and remind them to relax as well. I carry a lot of tension up in here, you might imagine, because of the public speaking that I do all the time, the faces that I hold, a lot of tension in here. So I like to do a little of this. Just taking that jaw back and forth, releasing the tongue from the top of the mouth. We can multitask while we stretch other areas. Are your shoulders up by your ears, or can we dial them down? Are you finding that you feel a little bit more opening in your hips? Can you scoot the heels of your feet a little closer to your pelvis? We'll hold here for just a few more seconds. Don't forget to breathe. Your body will do it anyway, but you can remind it to do better. Very good. Let's come out of that. In between each of these hip openers, I'd love for you to bring your legs together and just give them a little shimmy and back and forth. It just feels really good to kind of counter pose a little bit when we come out of those openers and then guide back into the next. Our next pose is called hero pose. So for this, we'll come seated initially on our heels, right? So it looks like this to start. We'll guide ourselves into more of an opener. So see how your bum is on your heels, hands and palms are flat on top of your thigh. To open up our hips a little bit more though, what we're gonna do is shift our feet to the outside of our hips and have a seat. Now, this one is a little bit more of a stretch on our hips, so I highly recommend the block in this situation. Remember, your block can come in this position or this, or even this if you need. For most of us, flat down like this is gonna be just fine. So I'll place that underneath my sits bones. Feet on either side of our glutes. Hands can be here, hands can be on your heels. Seems like a relaxing pose, but your hips will tell you otherwise. I'll spend a few breaths here and then I'll come down to the floor. Yoga is very much about symbolism and archetypes. It's about what each pose represents in a greater scale. So if we think about this being called hero pose, isn't that interesting? We think of heroes as being very active, engaged in battle, flying through the air. But a hero can be very strong, should be very strong, up here and here. And that comes from being calm, being quiet, sitting with yourself. I'll come down to the floor. You're welcome to stay where you are. We feel more of that stretch in our hips, right? One of the wonderful things about practicing on your own is that you don't have the comparison with other yogis. As humans, we tend to look around and go, that person's far more flexible than me. I should be like that. And that's incorrect. The only person you should try to be a little bit better than, a little bit stronger than, a little bit more flexible than, is yourself yesterday. All right, let's come out of that hero's pose and into something that has a much goofier name. It's called cow face pose. Cow face pose, yeah. Follow along with me. We're back to our cross-legged position. Only we're going to bring those knees one on top of the other. And when it's all said and done, you'll probably have a better idea of why it's called cow face pose. So we'll bring our left heel over to our right hip and our right foot over to our left. Once again, keeping in mind that what I'm doing is not necessarily what you'll be doing at home. So if it looks more like an open position like this, or if you prefer that cross-legged position we were in before and that's enough of a challenge for you, by all means. So right over left. Trying to keep our sits bones on the mat. So if you're tilting over to try to make this happen, you're going too far. Let's have a seat. Wherever your hips tell you is enough, is enough. Hands can be either on your feet, it can be on your knees. We can do eagle arms. We can have lots of fun with it. The real action is happening down here. So we'll spend a couple of moments here, and then we'll switch to the other side. You get the cow face part? Nose, ears. It's a bit of a stretch, pun intended. Hopefully by now you're noticing that we're working on the inside of our hips as well as the outside as well. This, I feel more of a stretch on the outside of my hips, and we counter that with some of our other poses that work the inside of our hips. And isn't it great that there are yoga poses we can do when we're just at home watching TV, right? It doesn't have to be very active. All right. Let's come out of that, give our legs a little shimmy. Boy, oh boy, I feel that one in my left hip. And now we'll come to the other side. So we're gonna take our right foot to left hip, left foot to right. See if our knees, if your goal is to get them aligned one on top of the other, mine are pretty close. Bring those feet in as close as you can, shoulders back and down. Make sure our sits bones are on the mat. Inhale and exhale. I don't know about you, but the way I usually describe where I carry my tension in my body is that I carry my present tension in my neck and shoulders, and I carry the past down here. And this is what took decades to build, right? So if you find that I'm doing any of these positions and they're a real challenge for you, please know they've been a challenge for me for many years, because it took many years to build up all that tightness. It's going to take time to bring it out too. All right, let's come out of that. Now we're going to come a long ways on our mat if we're not already there. Give our legs a little shimmy. And we're going to do what used to be one of my least favorites and now is one of my absolute favorites. It's called Pigeon Pose. And we can do this either face down or we can do it face up. I'm going to show you really quickly what it looks like face down, but we're going to execute it with our backs on the mat. So if we're doing it face down, it looks like this. In this case, my left leg is coming straight out behind me, my right is kneeling underneath me, and my ankle comes towards my left hip. And then we come down on the mat like this. Once again, reminding you, this is not the way the pose looked the first time I did it. On our backs, it looks very different and is excellent for people at any levels. So we'll come down on our back. We'll start with our right side. So our right ankle comes over our left leg as though we're doing that figure 4 position that we did seated in our previous video. We'll bring our left leg up, kind of do what we call threading the needle, where we bring the right hand in between the legs, left hand is on the outside of our left hip. We bring our palms together behind our leg, and then we guide that left leg in towards the left hip, keeping the right knee out to our right side, even guiding it a little bit with your hand if you prefer. You can place your hands here underneath your thigh. If you want more of a stretch, you can bend your leg and place your hands on the outside of your left shin. And then we breathe. Good. Let's release that pose, and now we'll do the other side, taking our left ankle over our right knee, bringing that right leg in, threading the needle again, hands behind our right thigh or over our right shin, and then pulling in towards our hips. Again, a gentle stretch, not a yank. This is not about straining the muscle. We do plenty enough of that already. You may have noticed too, a lot of these poses can be done on the mat. They can also be done in bed. If you want to do this before you go to bed at night, oh, it's a perfect bedtime stretch series. It's also really great first thing in the morning to wake the body up. Very good. Let's come out of that, but we're going to stay on our backs, yay, and come back to another cute name of a yoga pose. It's Happy Baby. So when we think about babies and they're laying on their backs, they're doing a lot of kind of wobbling back and forth. They're exploring their own mobility, learning what their body can do. We're going to do the same thing here. So from our backs, we're going to take our feet up in the air, and if we can reach, I'll give you some modifications as well. We're going to take our hands to the inside of each of our feet and then lay back down. Now that will guide your knees to the outside of each of your ribs. And that's where we're opening and stretching the hips. Now, if that's too far of a reach for now, it's fine. You can take your hands to your knees and kind of pull the legs open just a little bit, remembering to try to bring those knees up towards your shoulders and opening up the hips that way. But I always think it's extra fun, because we never do this in real life, right? To grab our feet, open up the hips, and then we can play. And that play is good for your hips, so we can stretch the legs back and forth, we can stretch them both straight, open them up, lubricating the joints as well as opening up the hips. Happy baby. I'm trying to remember where I read this, but I read that play is so important for children. We always tell them they need to play, they need to go out, they need to have fun, they need to let their bodies just move and dance and be silly. And somewhere along the way, we stop doing that. And that's such a shame, right? It's good for us. All right. Let's come out of that, bring our feet flat on the mat, knees bent. We're going to finish with what's called bridge pose. And this is both a hip opener and also a back bend at the same time. But don't let that scare you. A back bend does not mean that we come into a full curve or wheel pose. We might do that down the road. But in this case, what we're going to do is simply bring our heels back towards our glutes and then lift the hips up so that we create a sort of bridge with our legs. Now, we can stay in this position, putting our hands down on the mat, or if you'd like a little more support, you can come back to using that yoga block in any position that you might need to give you that support is just fine. I like to do it without because it helps to engage a lot more muscles and kind of give me a little bit of a strength pose at the same time. What we don't want to do is open up the knees. We want to keep them nice and parallel, or in line rather, with our hips. Let's come down. We'll do that 2 more times. Lift up. Very important that you keep the back of your head on your mat and your neck in a neutral position. I'm turning briefly to speak to you. You do not want to turn your neck in this position. Come down, and we'll bring it back up 1 more time. If you're doing this without the yoga block, you're feeling that engagement in the glutes. It's also a really great core and glute exercise. And come on down. All right, we'll lay out straight, relaxing on our mat, palms down or palms up. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. All right, yogis, that's our hip opening sequence. Hopefully you feel loads better after than you did in the beginning. Come back to this as often as you need and track your progress. You'll probably find the more you do it, the more open you become. And that is a wonderful thing. Namaste.